Okay, well, thanks for clicking there and joining us for our conversation with John Fonte. I'm Mike Hartmann, uh, and the other former Bradley Foundation official, much higher than I was at the time, and it's still now, is Dan Schmidt, longtime vice president for program at the Bradley Foundation and also a co-editor of the Giving Review. John Fonte, with whom we'll be speaking here, is a senior fellow and director of the Center for American Common Culture at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. He's written widely on many various subjects, including immigration, international organizations, and civics education. I'll say history and civics education. Uh, he worked closely with Dan Schmidt, really, and Dan's loyal staff on a project in 2008. The publication of the report of the Bradley Project on America's National Identity was in 2008. We think self-servingly that it was ahead of its time. And we can talk with John about that project and what has happened since to America's national identity. He also, John, has written a chapter for a new book just out from Encounter Books. The name of the book is Up from Conservatism, Revitalizing the Right After a Generation of Decay. And the chapter that John wrote in there for it is entitled Rediscovering a Genuine American Narrative. So why don't we start there, John? Is there something disingenuine about the current American narrative?
Yes, what we have, well, particularly the last couple of years, is the development, whatever you want to call it, we call it the progressive narrative. And essentially, it's a narrative of systems of oppression. So there's a dichotomy within America. There's a group called, we could call them the oppressors, white male, heterosexual, and so on. And everybody else is the oppressed or the marginalized. So the story of America is one of slavery, and then later racial segregation, and essentially these systems of oppression. This is what comes to us today from leading historical groups. You look at the literature from the American Historical Association or the Organization of American Historians. This is how they're presenting American history. And this is spread widely throughout the education establishment. This is sort of, you might say, the dominant narrative among professional educators. That would be state and local officials in education, members of the education bureaucracy. So they're presenting a narrative that is rather different from what historically has been American story. And it's a story that really can't be sustained over the long run if you're going to have a society and have a coherent, let's say, constitutional democracy in which citizens are totally involved. So in this article that you referred to, I said that this essentially false narrative, this narrative of oppression, should be countered. There should be a counter narrative to it. We should present essentially an alternative, and that's really not rather hard to do because the material is almost already there. You look at, and we're going to talk about this a little later, the Bradley report back in 2008, E Pluribus Unum, that starts getting it. You look at recently, there's the Hillsdale College has put out an entire history civics curriculum that's going to be taught in over 80 Hillsdale affiliated K-12 schools. You have a curriculum put forth by the National Association of Scholars, America's Birthright, that's out there. You had a presidential commission, 1776 commission, which was created during the previous administration to combat 1619. A lot of people from Hillsdale, from Claremont, from Heritage worked on that. That's out there. There's the 1776 Unites, put out by Robert Woodson, and basically essentially an African-American effort. Later on, I think in another article I think that you're aware of, I talk about conservative accommodationism, which I mean, conservative scholars, perhaps for the best of intentions, accommodating this progressive narrative and this progressive revolution, and trying to come up with a consensus. Let's reach some type of national consensus. Where is common ground in this? I see that as a problem, and I'll get to the end, because I mean the common ground is problematic if we look at it. There was this project that seeks to do this, Educating for American Democracy. It included the executive committee has about 7, let's call them progressive educators, and about 3 we can call conservative professors of history and political philosophy. And their goal was to reach some sort of consensus, but it was dominated by the left. They had 300 people involved: teachers, school administrators, state and local officials. I went through the list and I found maybe about 10 of this 300 that would be, you could say, were non-progressives. So this was sort of the overall, this is the correlation of forces, as the Marxists might say. So what's in the document that's and the final document that these conservatives, what I'm calling conservative accommodationists, agreed to? Well, the document Educating for American Democracy said that it's too bad that students can reach high school without knowing that, quote, George Washington was not only a foundational leader, but also enslaved people. Well, that's, of course, just absolutely false. Washington did not enslave, or none of the other founders enslaved people, in the sense seizing people who were free and putting them into chains. And to enslave would be an active verb. So if they were in slavery or active. This, of course, didn't happen. They inherited slaves and sought, case of Washington, he freed his slaves on in his will, and also provided for their education, so they would be able to support themselves. And he said, there's not a man alive who would like to see slavery abolished more than I am. And of course, the founders, as Lincoln said, put slavery on the course to ultimate extinction. It wasn't possible politically or economically to do it in 1776 or 1789, but they set it on a course where it eventually would be abolished. So getting back to just enslaver, this is a new concept. It's come up, I don't know, maybe in the last 5 or 6 years. And the purpose there is called Washington enslaver, but you go to Monticello and you go to Montpelier, you learn that Jefferson and Madison were also enslavers. So all of this literature, you pick up a curriculum from, say, any state in the country now, and you'll see that the American founders are listed as enslavers. You go to their homes and you see the same thing. So what is behind this? Well, this is essentially a weaponized term. It's not a neutral term. It's a false term, because they weren't enslavers. They were slave owners. There's a difference. But it's weaponized because it sounds bad, doesn't it? If someone is an enslaver, well, they're a bad person. They're negative. I mean, so that includes the founders. They're all enslavers. So why do you do that? Why do you call the enslavers? Why do you call the founders enslavers? Well, you want to delegitimize the founders. That's the purpose. There's a purpose here. It's a political purpose, ideological purpose. It's to delegitimize the founders. What's the purpose of delegitimizing the founders? It's to delegitimize the founding. It's to delegitimize America. Well, these people were a bunch of slave, they were Simon Legree. They were a bunch of slave owners, slave dealers, enslavers. They went out and enslaved people. So why should we pay attention to them? They created systems of oppression that marginalized all kinds of people. Blacks, minorities, women, gays, transgender. I mean, they didn't treat any of these people as equals. So the society that they created is therefore a deeply flawed society, or worse. So that's one part of that's in the Education for Democracy project. So these conservative professors, I mean, I mentioned them in my article. I won't mention them here. They've rebutted me. I've rebutted them. There's a whole series, there's 4 articles back and forth. But they were authors of this document. They signed on to the document, Washington enslaver. They also signed on the concept of what is a citizen. So the Educating for Democracy, headed by the way, by Daniel Allen, who's a professor at Harvard, who's the daughter of a very famous conservative Straussian professor, Bill Allen, who's a friend of mine, and so on. But she grew up, started with Bill Allen, so she knows how to talk Straussian, she knows how to talk to conservative. But anyway, over the time, she's become a very progressive, and she's put this project together. I had an exchange with her. You can look at it. It's there on the internet. But she came up with, she said, well, let's define citizen. What's a citizen? She said, well, yeah, there are these people who are legal citizens of the United States, sure, live in this country. But there are also many residents who may not be citizens and who may not even be here legally. But these people are, they're with us, they live with us, they're civic participants. And they should be involved in the decision making, just like these other citizens. So they're civic participants. So that's a new definition. So I asked the conservative professors, well, do you have a civic participant who could be an illegal alien, maybe came last week just through our new open border system, or maybe came illegally a year ago, or maybe 20 years ago, still here. They have equal right to decision-making in American constitutional democracy. With American citizenship, then there isn't much point of American citizenship. If it's all residents, then fine, we're just residents. And residents, maybe in the last hour. So this is in the document. So that's why I'm getting to specific discussion here. This is in the document. But it sounded pretty good because it said, let's get people together, let's have a consensus. They didn't know the final product. In other words, they came to this consensus, but of course this happened before, if you remember, with the National History Statement put together by some of the people, some of our bosses there. Bill Bennett and Liz Cheney and Chester Finn and so on. And they said, well, okay, we'll get all the history professors together. We'll come up with this objective document. Well, history professors that were mainly liberal, but then they went even beyond that. And you had Gary Nash, who had written a book, Red, White, and Black. He sort of laid it out. America's the story of these three different tribes. So if people were paying attention, they would have caught on to this, but apparently they didn't. I was sort of in the ranks there too when this was going on. But eventually, the document that came out, the National History Standards, 1994-95, were a progressive document. Nothing like Educating for Democracy 20 years later, but anyway, it was the beginning, and we should have learned better. So whenever let's put all the professors together and get a consensus, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, we tried to combat that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, why don't we finish with part one there and pick up with part two in a bit to talk about this some more?
Okay.